All right, let's get started. Good morning, everyone, and to our friends and colleagues based in Asia or in Europe. Good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to the Central Asia Program seminars. My name is Sébastien Pérouse. I'm a research professor working with the Central Asia Program at the Institute for European, Russian, and Eurasian Studies at George Washington University. So I'm really delighted to welcome today Professor Bakhrom Radjabov, who has just published a book entitled Social Innovation in Post-Soviet Countries. I mean, this book is published by Routledge. I'd say that at a time when there is much talk about social conflicts in Central Asia and about violence, and we have seen on several occasions this year in Kazakhstan, in Tajikistan, or in Karakalpakstan, in Uzbekistan, an essential question raised within the countries of Central Asia, but also in partner countries, including in the West and in international organizations, is how to contribute to social development, what works, what doesn't work, and how to assess what works and what doesn't work. And as demonstrated by Mr. Bakhrom Radjabov in his book, one of the issues is that a mainstream analysis often implies a macro-level political economy assessment of developments in Central Asia, and not only in Central Asia, as he demonstrates in his book, but also in the South Caucasus or in Eastern Europe. But it often leaves aside other significant changes which are happening on the micro level. So Dr. Radjabov explains in his book how new social practices on the micro level replace the old inefficient ones and change social, economic, entrepreneurial, and governance system to achieve desired outcomes. So to do so, he has studied social innovation projects, which are supported by various organizations in post-Soviet countries. So, I mean, I'm not going to say more. Bakhrom is going to tell us, you in a minute much more about this, about his book and about his findings. So Dr. Bakhrom Radjabov is currently an adjunct professor at Webster University in Tashkent, in Uzbekistan, where he teaches MA graduate program in education and innovation. His research interests include social innovations, political economy, migrations, and development issues. We had a chance to have him with us here at the Central Asia Program, and he's currently an Asia Global Fellow at the Asia Global Institute at Hong Kong University. So Bakhrom is going to present about something like 25 minutes or half an hour. After his presentation, we will have a Q&A session. So please feel free to send us your question in the chat box. So Bakhrom, thank you so much for being with us today, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Sebastian. And I'm honored to be today with Central Asia Program, with George Washington University, and have so many people here interested in social innovations. First, I would like, before sharing the screen, before actually talking about my presentation, I would like to mention two things here. First is, like Sebastian already mentioned, usually Central Asia, South Caucasus, or Eastern Europe, like these post-Soviet countries, they attract more attention when something happens, and usually something bad. You know, some issues, some conflicts. And so, and I don't mean here the experts in the region, but in general public, sometimes even the politicians in Europe, and so they usually don't know much about the region, maybe some information. This is number one. And number two, I would like to tell you why I actually started researching social innovation, what probably drove my attention and raised my scientific research curiosity in this topic. First of all, I started with social innovation as a topic being employed by United Nations Development Program in Uzbekistan. And we started a project in social innovation and volunteerism, which was basically empowering local communities, working with youth, inspiring them to design new innovative solutions for their local problems. And then I had one example from Bukhara region of Mr. Ikhtior Kamalov and his team of young people who actually engineered a so-called rural shower. It was a construction of a water efficient shower system that could be used by farmers and by local communities in Bukhara region where the scarcity of water is a huge issue. And farmers, especially during the harvest season, cotton picking fields did not have enough water even to satisfy their daily needs or some sanitation or just some their sanitation needs. Okay, and this is how then looking at these young people with the innovative ideas of using plastic bottles that are not reused and using some woods that was left over after some construction done in the rural area, and then using some very simple technology of elastic tubes to design so-called rural shower. So this is how this all started. This is a true story, and this was the inspiration for me. By the way, this is now you can see the shower and these people over there. Let me get back to this slide. You see very simple construction and young people doing this job for rural communities. And of course, when I have started my research, first of all, it was a hard work to write a book, and the book is partly based on my PhD dissertation that I wrote in the University of Tsukuba in Japan, and that was dedicated only to the social innovation projects in governance sector in 3 selected countries: in Armenia, Uzbekistan, and Ukraine. They were picked on purpose, but this could be a question you might ask later on. And now I just want to focus on the book. And in the book, you will find 9 countries, and I focus there on 9 countries and social innovation projects in different areas in these 9 countries. Those are the 4 Central Asian countries, 3 countries of South Caucasus, Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Georgia, and then Ukraine and Moldova. But before I started, it was a huge confusion. You can see my face here. Because I didn't know what social innovation is. This is what I've told already. And then I didn't know how to actually identify what is social innovation and what is not, because in the research, the scholars, they do not have one unified, universal definition of social innovation. And if you just Google it or search for some academic definition of social innovation, you will find out a lot of probably dozen of different definitions. Some of them overlap, even some organizations provide their own definition, but this is not one universal definition. And this is not good or bad, this is just a fact, because there are some scholars telling, oh, you know, social innovation is something really wide. Well, it's very different, it's very complex definition, or it's a complex term, and defining it with just one universal definition would not be helpful. But for me as a researcher, that was some confusion, or the problem, I would say research problem, because I wanted to research social innovation projects in these 9 countries. And for that, I need to apply certain standards probably to anything what is done or called or labeled as social innovation. So those are the countries I focus. You can see the countries. So I focus on Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, and Tajikistan in Central Asia, and then Azerbaijan, Armenia, and Georgia in South Caucasus, Ukraine and Moldova in Eastern Europe. You can probably later ask, why not Russia? Why not some other countries? This is a question probably for the discussion. I can tell you later. This was basically my focus on these 9 countries. And what I found also very interesting, that social innovation in those countries were used for development purposes. This is very clear, used by different donors, UNDP, UNICEF, USAID, and many others. And I found 5 elements there that are very general. They are applicable for all 9 countries. First, Development donors, they applied this social innovation to frame development projects. And through social innovation projects in some countries, win government support. Because probably, or let's say in those cases, donors saw the social innovation projects as a tool to avoid some probably sensitive issues. Like I researched the governance, and of course, going to some governments and tell that, yeah, there's a government issue and we want to redesign the policy and so on. Sometimes this didn't work. So through social innovations, this was done sometimes efficiently, sometimes not, but this was the true approach. And by the way, UNDP, for example, used social innovations in post-Soviet countries, first in Armenia, and then later in some other countries like Moldova, Uzbekistan, and so on, just to run these development projects. So developmental type of social innovation projects, or social innovation as a term applied by development agencies, was there. And this made the whole social innovation term, the notion of social innovation, very developmental. So basically receiving an additional criteria of developmental, being developmental in a way aimed at development issues. Then, of course, social innovations by those the donors were used in a way. All the projects they did they'd already had the label. Oh, okay, we are doing social innovation now here, without a critical evaluation of whether this development project is actually a social innovation. And this is, of course, happened due to the very simple reason, because nobody actually critically evaluate those development projects against social innovation criteria, because no one before applied those criteria to conduct this evaluation, right? So this was number 3. Number 4, the role of the government in many of these post-Soviet countries was huge. And in some of these countries, like Georgia, Armenia, local policy entrepreneurs were the driving force for advancement of social innovation projects. Who are those policy entrepreneurs? Open question. I can tell you more later. Here, I just mentioned that those were the people usually, for example, if this is in the governance sector, then someone in the government or in the local governments on the middle level, not the top, not the decision makers, but those who actually deal with social issues. They were picked intentionally by the social innovation labs in those countries, and then even through the competitions for these people, because they knew actually how the service is designed and what are the issues of the end users are experiencing. So this was a very efficient way through this so-called policy entrepreneurs to redesign policies. Number 5, risk of losing meaning and potency. This is exactly what has happened based on my findings in post-Soviet countries. Basically, social innovations were used or intermixed with many different terms like civic engagement, volunteerism, public innovations, etc., you name it. And this is a threat for the term. First, the definition is not there. This is what I have mentioned already at the very beginning. And when definition is not there, then anything can be a social innovation, basically. And this is a problem in general, not only for post-Soviet countries, but in general, this is an issue for social innovations just being used as anything. And therefore, usually you can hear the opinion that social innovation is something everybody does, but nobody understands. What I needed to understand before applying criteria, before evaluating those projects, I was looking for something very sharp, very comprehensive, to help me in my research to identify or to evaluate these social innovation projects and identify what is social innovation there, what is not. For that, I've generated, based on the literature and theories existing about social innovation, theory, social practice theory, actors network theory, connected difference approach, and many others, plus the literature already existing about social innovations, But based on all that review, I came up with 8 criteria. So if I cannot tell you what social innovation is, then another option could be to tell you what is not social innovation, right? But I thought that the better is to come up with these certain features that are applicable to social innovation. So what is that? It should be something new, right? Since it's innovation, should be something new, at least contextually new. Not entirely new. I mean, it was clear that it's not easy to design an entirely new thing, a service or product, impossible. But for these countries, this invention or new practice could be really contextually new. This is number one. And the order, by the way, doesn't matter. This is just all these 8 criteria that should be applicable, and then this is anything can be considered as social innovation. So then number 2, people-centered. If the project is not people-centered, meaning not aimed at the needs of the people in the community and not basically reported by these communities that this is a certain problem that they want to solve, then it's not a social innovation. And then what usually development owners before they go to community, they tell people, okay, you don't have a school or a road, or you have this or that economic or social challenge there, so we need to tackle that. Or usually the government does that, or some others. In a social innovation approach, people tell what the problem is and people design the solution usually. But this is ideal way of doing so, but the people-centered approach is crucial here. And in the book, I also describe and talk about and analyze the cases when the government actually used top-down approach and that this didn't work really. Then now networking and collaboration. Usually the idea in the Central Asia, for example, I found many examples of that organizations actually thought that social innovation is something that should be run by civic sector only. Of course, they were open for collaboration with government, with business, with other actors, but still this should be something civil society driven. Unfortunately, this approach doesn't work because social innovation happens on the intersection of many sectors, and there should be a certain ecosystem to generate this social innovation. It should be local, maybe. Usually, what I've learned from the experiences from these post-Soviet countries, social innovations start locally. They start as a local project aimed at addressing certain local needs. But over time, sometimes by using technology, and this is the next feature, this local solution could be diffused across the social system, or in other words, scaled up. And this is a scaling feature for social innovation, which is also crucial and should be there. Otherwise, this is just a satisfaction of local needs and that's it, and could be a very nice local social project, but not a social innovation. By the way, technology, which is also a feature here for social innovation, is not always the case. I mean, it doesn't mean that every social innovation should be technologically advanced. Sometimes it could be a very simple solution that could be scaled up, and this works perfectly. We know these cases also, such examples also in Central Asia, for example, in other countries. But the social innovation should address social needs and have social impact. And here is the problem, because, and this is a general problem of the scholars, to find a good instruments and methodology to measure social impact. Unfortunately, in post-Soviet countries, I haven't noticed anything, or I just learned about some really simple approach to measure social impact. But this should be there. If social innovation, any social innovation project doesn't make a social impact, of course, it cannot be qualified as social innovation. And last, social change or systemic change, as you wish. So this social innovation project should make, in the end, over time, not overnight, but over time, should make a social change. And only then, when social change happens, anything can be qualified as social innovation. Okay, what I've learned here very briefly and comprehensively here on nuance, yeah. Social innovation projects in the countries I have studied were contextually new, fine. Sometimes, so they were lacking newness in social practices. And there are some countries, most of them in Central Asia again, that were just suffering from this lack of newness, usually addressed to the civic sector. Civil society organizations could not actually generate a new solution for existing problems. People-centeredness. Social innovation projects are not always human-centered, not always user-driven in these 9 countries. Not always, and quite often, in different political regimes, the solutions are designed not from the bottom up. Sorry, upside down. So from the government to the local community, not vice versa. Though I mentioned already that this should be from the communities to the government. Networking. It was very strong collaboration between NGOs, on the grassroots level, NGOs, local individuals, policy entrepreneurs, sometimes even local governments. Very good. But sometimes, well, to scale up social innovation, to advance it, more government support was needed, but it was really intermittent. It was not there sometimes due to very different reasons. Sometimes governments were not interested. Sometimes governments were very often changing. And those who had this commitment to develop some social innovation projects were just gone. And so then the social innovation labs or the social innovators had to again talk to different new politicians, convince them, and run all this again and again and again. And it was very low donor coordination, by the way. This is something I found in many countries. Many donors, even in one country, they were not really coordinating their action. Very interesting. Localness. Yes, social innovation projects were mostly launched locally, and they were aimed at specific domain, be it governance, education, poverty reduction, environment, you name it, very local and very specific. Using technology, over time, the trend was prevailing. So more and more social innovation projects were using technologies. And this was, I mean, for a clear reason, of course, especially during the COVID. You could read one of my papers for Central Asian program. I wrote for Central Asian program about that. A lot of very simple technologies, sometimes even messengers or mobile applications. In Moldova, very good examples of that. I can tell you later. And social impact. So it was really problematic. I mentioned that already, to measure social impact across the system, because methodology to measure is not there yet, and we don't know how to do that. And this was also very true for post-Soviet countries. Scaling up. Oh, okay, scaling was possible to a certain extent. I would say to the medium scaling up possibility was there. Across all post-Soviet countries, I cannot name even one example of, the real scale up across the whole country, not yet. But this was also directly correlated with the collaboration, correlated with government collaboration. Very much. If government support is not there, unfortunately, in many countries, it doesn't matter what kind of regime, political regime, any economic stance. It doesn't actually matter. If government doesn't support that in any way, then usually, unfortunately, those projects are not sustainable. And donor support is not helpful, by the way. And sometimes it's even not about money and funding. Social change, slow process of any change, any change of social practices, like replacement of the new social practices, of an old social practice to new social practices. So the social change, of course, doesn't happen again. I emphasize that it doesn't happen overnight. But this should be a certain trend toward this social change through the institutional judicial, economic, and many other arrangements in this society. So I was not really observing that in all 9 post-Soviet countries. But if you want, of course, to know more, you can ask me now, and certainly I always have 3 words for you if you're interested in social innovations and in changes on the micro level in post-Soviet countries. So then please read my book. This is 3 words I can use here and finish my presentation. And of course, I am very open for your questions and eager to provide maybe some practical good examples of social innovation projects and tell you about the challenges and problems. Thank you, Sebastian. I'm done.
Thank you so much, Bakhrom, for this very rich presentation. It, of course, raises a lot of possible discussions. There are so many topics, issues related to your research. Again, I'd like to remind our audience, please feel free to send me your questions in the chat box. Let me ask you first question, maybe. International donors, public and private organizations and CSOs, as you mentioned in your book, cooperate with governments in order to achieve their goals or to deliver development assistance. But when it comes to international organizations and foreign stakeholders, generally speaking, what we often hear is that local stakeholders have expressed many criticisms on how projects are initiated and conducted by foreign stakeholders. And one of the main criticisms is that many, or at least some of these projects, are designed from abroad according to as we call a one-size-fits-all approach, without sufficiently taking into account the local context, whatever, historical, political, economic, social context, which may have or which have negative consequences in terms of impact of these projects. So I was wondering, in the many interviews that you conducted for your book, was this a criticism that was reported to you? And if yes, do your interlocutors, your interviewees consider that international organizations are trying to respond to this problem? Have they, in a way, drawn some lessons from that?
Sebastian, thank you for the question. 2 things to mention here. First, introducing social innovations as an approach to design, for instance, development projects differently, was the rationale behind this rethinking of the development aid to the post-Soviet, in our case, to post-Soviet countries. Exactly because this criticism was heard. And UNDP, for example, where I worked, I mentioned this first reason was to try to avoid this sensitivity of, for example, of the governance issues of, running this democratic governance approach and so on. Yeah, this is number one. But then what was intended to do is to empower local communities and to let them speak, to let these many independent and very diverse voices to be raised, and to let them or to equip them with certain instruments to design the solution. And this was due to the understanding that development aid should be people-centered, user-centered, right? This is the user who tells you what to do and how to do. One example, for example, from Yerevan, from Armenia, even the state budget was outsourced to people. Well, how it was done is basically, of course, there are so many issues in the country, and the budget is usually limited. But then, for instance, the budget could be, or the issues could be squeezed to like 10 or 20, and then there were this, the ideas or the issues could be given to the people to decide where this limited amount of money, the budget, should go, and to which of these issues to solve, both on the local level and on the national level. The same was for UNDP, for example, in Armenia, to design their development projects. They, of course, knew about SDGs or MDGs and then SDGs, and they have all these documents like poverty reduction strategy paper or many others. They know about development issues. They talk to donors. They talk to other stakeholders. They talk to government, and so they imagine have like 20 issues to solve, development issues to solve. But then they let people to decide or to vote for the certain issues there, and then they pick those voted or actually supported by people as the primary priority issue to tackle, priority development challenge to tackle. So this was also the change there. I'm not saying that it was ideal approach, but at least it was a attempt to rethink that and to let people act. This is number one. But number two was quickly realized that sometimes, or maybe quite often, local communities, individuals, they know very well what the problem is, but they don't know how to solve this issue. And here, the outsiders resources, so this innovation tools, design thinking methodology on how to innovate, and et cetera, this is needed. So people should be equipped with those instruments, then to generate some social innovation projects, run them, maybe, hopefully, ideally receive support from the local government, national government, and then if it's really a successful project, really to scale up it or even change something in legislation like it happened in Ukraine, and really back up these projects and to diffuse them across the whole system. In the end, this should bring a change of an existing inefficient, old, and the social practice that hinders development to the new social practice that is more efficient and more people-centric, etc. This is the approach.
Thank you. So we have some kind of theoretical question, and the question is: did innovators follow existing social connections in their work collaboration, and how would you compare your findings against the diffusion of innovation as addressed by Rogers, including roles highlighted in Tipping Point as addressed by Gladwell, and was there change in approaches over time? I mean, early post-Soviet versus now.
This is. I'll try to explain here. I was looking at social innovation projects from 2012 to 2020. Why 2012? Because I was looking for the cases of social innovation projects first used in post-Soviet countries. And I found that, for example, was first used, applied this methodology, social innovation approach was applied in Armenia in 2011, probably 12, and then 2012 later in Uzbekistan. So it was not easy to compare with anything before that, because this was entirely new approach, even for development donors, even for them, and even for civil society organizations. What I can do now, after I researched something from Southeast Asia, is to compare how it was, or how it worked differently in Eurasia, in these post-Soviet countries, and some Southeast Asian countries. But this is a completely different topic, and we cannot discuss it, we should not discuss it now, but this is very interesting, and many interesting findings are there just in terms of comparison. Theoretically, what is here important to understand is that unfortunately in post-Soviet countries, this topic was, well, it's new, first of all, not sufficiently addressed or researched, and we don't have enough data to judge about even the level of social innovativeness of these certain countries. Like, for example, it was possible back in 2016 to develop social innovation index That was developed, by the way, by the Economist Intelligence Unit. And based on these 4 pillars, I can share the slide, or it's accessible also online. So the 4 pillars that were applied to, and then use the data from the countries to measure the level of social innovativeness in different countries, where South Korea or Singapore are now the champions, not the US, unfortunately, or Europe, fortunately or unfortunately, but these countries in Southeast Asia, in Asia. And this was not possible, or this methodology or this index could not be applied in Central Asia or in post-Soviet countries in general. And there was a gray zone. And we need a lot of data on, both the government's performance, the ecosystem for entrepreneurs, for social entrepreneurs, and et cetera, et cetera. So it's a very complex approach there. It's not there yet, so I cannot really talk a lot about this now at the moment. But over time, I hope I will.
All right, thank you. So, you briefly mentioned that already in your presentation, that one of the problems is also the lack of coordination between foreign stakeholders who are involved in social innovation projects. And you have a large number of foreign donors involved in a multitude of projects, which sometimes create some overlaps between the different stakeholders. So do you consider that this is indeed a problem in Central Asia? And if yes, have there been some initiatives to improve coordination between the different stakeholders?
Again, another very good question, Sebastian. And this was not even an issue for Central Asia. I have even anecdotal situations when I was talking to different people in these different countries, and they were telling me, oh, that's good that you're writing a book about social innovation, because we know that some of other organizations in the country are doing social innovations, but we cannot get any information about those projects. They're not sharing this information with us. We love to collaborate and to know more about different experiences and so on, but we cannot. And if they will tell you, and we can later read your book, then we will know about other partners or other organizations in the country doing that, supporting social innovations. Why I think this is an issue here, and why I put this as an issue, because again, in many cases in those countries, donors are engaged in these projects, and any donor would tell you that if you are not coordinating your efforts, and this is, by the way, the thing that you by default should do in the country in order not to waste your resources coming from from the taxpayers, from other people from other countries. So it's a good idea first to coordinate in order not to waste resources, and to probably make more by just spending less, maybe sometimes, because resources are very limited, especially when the crisis situation, not many people actually think about social innovations per se. They try to satisfy some basic needs, and a good example is COVID. Right? Who thinks about social innovation when it's a health crisis in the world? It's complicated. So to avoid waste of resources, then to better coordination when you actually don't know what social innovation is and you don't know how to run it, is crucial. And I have also my personal experiences being invited to some of the Central Asian discussions and so on. It was very clear that unfortunately understanding is not there. So speakers are invited from one sector, and they of course speak about their perspective, and sometimes they don't see the interlink, the intersection, the connection between the work they do, maybe over many years, with the private sector, with government, and so on. Or they see it just as good to be there, good to work with them, but if not, then not, and that's it. And the same with government, the same with private sector. By the way, in Hong Kong, for example, is different. It's private sector actually interested in running that, and others are just either fund that the social innovation projects, or they just don't pay any attention to social innovation projects. So this is number two. It's easy then if you coordinate your efforts to learn more about the process, to actually help to create this ecosystem, to design better and more sustainable social innovation projects that over time can turn into social innovation in your society, in your country, in your community. And number three, I would say for scholars, is very important, because at the moment it's, I would say it's very messy. We cannot really find the data reliable enough and good quality data to judge better or to research better the social innovation trend, which is a trend globally and also in the region, and to understand these micro level changes of multiple and sometimes very complex practices that actually generate change in these countries. This is not, again, as a macro, when it's macro level thing, be it a conflict on an issue or something good, then it's already the end result. So for us, it's important to understand how it works. So that's it.
Thank you. Another question is that in your research, could you identify any trends in terms of similar project times in certain countries? For example, more international initiatives in Kazakhstan versus Uzbekistan?
Sure. By the way, in the book I have, it's very, very detailed, and I actually show who is doing what in every country and who are those actors driving social innovation projects. Sometimes those are just gongos with international donors. Sometimes quite efficiently, it's the private sector. In Kyrgyzstan, it's in the Social Innovation Lab is attached to an academic institution, the American University of Central Asia. And it's very different landscape for social innovations out there. So, of course, I can tell, for example, in Moldova, in Georgia, in Armenia, those are basically UNDP, EU projects, plus, of course, with a strong collaboration with government. And there are many examples of that. For example, in Georgia, they've designed the 112, this emergency service, adjusted then, redesigned for people with disabilities, those who cannot speak over the phone. And there should be a system, if these people are in trouble, to let the emergency services know immediately. And this was the redesign of this policy, first the policy and then the service. In Moldova, a very simple example of, during the COVID, they use the data, available open data, and this is very important. It's kind of, this is the core idea also in many cases, in many countries in the book. So the availability of open data in Moldova made it possible to design mobile applications, then helping people to avoid these mass gatherings and the spread of infection in the hospitals. They could check before going to the hospital. It was crucial during the COVID time, especially when the first, second wave, and nobody actually knew how to treat that. I went personally through all that. So it's really, really essential things, but just using the open data. And sometimes, of course, just digitalization of any service, any public service, turned into, well, I would not say an innovation, but actually a better service provision for end users, like accessing schools in Yerevan, in Armenia, or, excuse me for this example, but this is part of our life. In Ukraine, it was the access to cemeteries, because there was a huge corruption there in cemeteries to get the land. So they basically digitalized the whole service. Now people could see if the land is available, or in Yerevan could see if the spot or the place in this certain, they have 3 big schools, like really prestigious schools, and of course everybody wants to send kids to those schools. But if the service is not digitalized, then those directors, and I'm not telling that they are corrupt, no, but they are now decide, and this is an asymmetry of information. Once this service was digitalized, parents could see if the place is there, they can use it. You see, this is an example of that, and this was done by EU, UNDP, and others. In Ukraine, sometimes even foreign countries through these neighborhood policies projects were funding these social innovation projects in Ukraine, even in crisis situation, even in war situation.
Thank you, Bakhrom. Another question is that the problems that arise with social innovation projects, like measuring social impact, social cultural factors which cause resistance to change or coordination between donors, all of these are very similar cross-culturally. So the question is there a way to parse out what is unique to Central Asia and what is more broadly a critique of social innovation projects in general?
I would say several things. I would agree that in many cases, the resistance is very similar. In many countries, like it was true for Georgia, it was true for any Central Asian countries, for example, resistance on the local governance level. I will give you an example from another South Caucasus country, from Armenia, for example, where equally or very similar to what has happened in Central Asia, local governments were resistant to a change because they thought first, oh, probably this is kids playing, it's not serious. This is just a donor came with some, let's say, weird ideas, weird to them, ideas of some innovation. No, not our piece of cake. No, we don't want to do that. And number two, they saw it as an additional burden. So it was, of course, the process of communication and convincing them, for example, in Armenia, and demonstrating that this is not something that is an additional burden. This is something that actually will help local governments to improve their services. And after they realized that, this worked perfectly well for them. And sometimes what donors did, and this was a huge role of the donors there, they took the risk that the local governments, for example, didn't want to take by introducing any innovation in the local context, in the local government, in the local governance and the local service provision. And then just to demonstrate that this works well, donors took this risk, also financial risk. They introduce on their own cost this innovation. Once it works, once the government understands that this is something benefit for them and it's good for people, then it could be scaled easily. So, it's like this very complicated, sometimes relationships, but these connections, these relationships should happen. Otherwise, any project is not sustainable. And I can tell you a lot of examples of such approach when the donor were just putting a lot of money to a certain sector, to certain organization that they know, and then it just doesn't work once the money is not there anymore. So this is important to understand. And it was not something really specific Central Asia or specific South Caucasian or specific Eastern European, like Ukrainian. So all the countries had this very same challenges, but the purpose, for example, on this government collaboration, right? I've just mentioned that in some cases, like in Central Asian countries, the interest was there, interest of the government. So the projects work. But in Eastern Europe, like in Ukraine, usually, the local governments, for example, were changing a lot due to elections. It's natural process, of course. But for the social innovation projects, more time is needed. And when the support of the government is needed and the person who has been committed to these changes is not there, then unfortunately the project fails. This is a true story usually. But for example, take the case of Uzbekistan. Back in 2012, 2014, the interest was not there, these projects on social innovations and so on. But after the change of the government, you could see that even the Ministry of Innovational Development was there. It was just because the government started actually thinking about innovations in general, in different areas, in agriculture, in economy, also in governance and so on, just to promote on different levels innovations in the country. So then it became a government priority for many. And even the public services improved after that. drastically improved. Even those who have criticized the delivery of public services, or to what extent they're digitalized, or to what extent they're easy for users and so on, now they should actually acknowledge that this area improved. Despite the resistance, despite that, the old bureaucracy or the business as usual, was always there. It's always there in any country, and in any post-Soviet country, as I've researched. But this has changed. So the change is possible. This is a very positive sign.
So you're from Uzbekistan. You have an extreme, you know your country extremely well. So a question is, many changes have been noted in this country since Mirziyoyev took over as president. Could you elaborate a little bit on how this has impacted, whether positively or negatively, social innovation projects in Uzbekistan, of course?
Sure. Again, I refer to the book and to the research I've done, and it's there in the book. I would tell you, I've already mentioned this general approach of the government, and this was the words of the president on promoting innovation, that without innovations in general, not just social innovations, but innovations in general, the country, the economy will not advance. So this is the future. This was clearly stated. And for good or for bad, in the country like Uzbekistan, if this is on the top level said, then usually this is the call for action for many others. Of course, with execution, was usually the issue, and not only in Uzbekistan, it's usually the issue, because the ecosystem, the infrastructure, the capacity, like the potential, the human capital, the people knowing how to run innovation projects, in our case, social innovation projects, was not there. I was part of a conference on social innovations in Tashkent back in 2017, when the Ministry of Innovation and Development was just established. And they had the conference, not anymore, unfortunately, but they had a conference on social innovations. When I looked at the program, there was no one with expertise in social innovations. And at the conference, a gentleman actually asked, in general, people, what is the difference of the innovations in social sector and social innovations? And this is a very valid question nobody asks. So the knowledge about what is social innovation, what we want to change, how we want to change this, and what are the resources that should be used is not there yet. Though, for example, USAID also was, I think, 5 years very successful P4I project. They were supported also, it was a local partner and a partner from Kazakhstan for this project. So they were trying to run different social innovation projects there, and you will find my assessment of the work done there. But the attempt was there, and this was just because also in general, the whole political environment has changed, and more priority was given to social innovations, to innovations in general, etc., etc. Again, challenges are there, and I've just named that. But now, differently from what we personally had back in 2012, 2014, very important point, political will is there. And well, political will and execution don't mix them. That the political will is there, and the government tried to run a lot of public sector innovations, very different, both online and offline. I think I also I wrote an article about that, and they had to, and you should understand that to solve very essential basic issues. If you want to run an innovation there, you see that the speed of internet is not high. You see that the infrastructure, just simple computers, are not there in the local governments on the local level. You should first solve all these sometimes very routine, very boring issues before actually going, and it's just fancy, let's make some innovations topics. That's it.
Thank you. So, we only have a few minutes left, 3 more minutes. And I have a question which I think is very good to conclude. what would be the key recommendations of supervising the social innovations project? Did you ever consider the social innovation examples in China, for example?
Of course, and I learned these experiences from both mainland China and when I was in Hong Kong, also learning the experiences from the social innovations in Hong Kong, which is also very new for this part of China, and designed very differently, and the rationale is very different from what we have in post-Soviet countries. But the lessons learned there is basically first, as for the recommendations, I would say again, creating the ecosystem is important. For that, I again give this recommendation from what I learned even from post-Soviet countries. Stronger civil society, more collaboration with government. You like it or not, this is important in post-Soviet countries. This is how it's designed, and more opportunities for entrepreneurship, because basically what social innovation is you have different frameworks there, and one of the frameworks is political, another is social framework, another is entrepreneurial framework. But with political framework, it's important to enable social issues to be mirrored to the political decision making, to change the policies. And for that, you need think tanks, you need open data, you need social startups that actually base your experience, or they actually use the experience they have and the data available to design new projects. This happened already in many post-Soviet countries, so it's also possible to spread these good experiences out there. And don't focus on just one sector, and do not design these social innovations from the up, from the government level. So those innovations should come from the grassroots level. At least the people on the local level should be more vocal about their social issues, and they should be able to design solutions for these social issues. If you go other way, top-down approach, unfortunately, even you will learn this from my book, those examples are not sustainable. So this is basically, I would say, it. So as the local initiatives should be supported from the national level to the national government level. Otherwise, they will not work.
Okay, so unfortunately, we need to conclude, but if you want to know much more about the topic of social innovation projects in Central Asia and beyond, please read Bakhrom's book. This is an extremely interesting book. So I'd like to thank Bakhrom Radjabov for, your presentation today. Thank you so much for sharing your findings. I would also like to thank our audience for being with us, for your questions and the discussion. And we look forward to having you again one of our upcoming seminars. So thank you very much. Have a good day or good afternoon or good evening. Thank you. Goodbye.
Goodbye. Thank you, Sebastian.